Happy New Year. It's That Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com, and I am so glad that you're checking out the lesson with me for the first Sunday of 2016, January 3rd. I'm sure that you did something meaningful with your family to bring in the new year. What an awesome blessing that God allowed us to cross over and see it. I personally rang it in with my church family and watch meeting, celebrating all that God did in 2015 and what He's going to do in 2016. I pray that you've embraced the word that was spoken for you and your household, and even for those things that you have decreed and declared. I pray that God will allow you to accomplish every success, and that He will make this a year of great purpose and prosperity, not just financially, but for you in every area of your life. Listen, if you are new around here, welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web, and we are so glad that you are here. We hope that you'll be blessed by these video highlights. They are done each week for 3 reasons. Number 1, to encourage you to make Sunday school part of your regular weekend routine. And with it being the first of the year, everyone is making resolutions, aren't they? Well, I'm not really making resolutions, but according to the parking lot at the gym where you cannot find a parking space today, many people are committed to health and wellness and weight loss. So while we're doing all those things, I hope that you have your spiritual development on your list of things to take a look at for 16. And maybe Sunday school is an easy way to incorporate if you're looking for ways to find a daily devotion or a daily read. Sunday school is an easy way to do that because those are available and they help you to study the lesson and kind of learn more about the background, the context, and put it all in perspective. So there's my shameless plug for Sunday School 2016. Secondly, when you go to class, you are able to be a more active participant because you have studied and prepared to be a part of the dialogue. But most importantly, when you leave, you are able to activate this word in your everyday lives. Now, if you have taken a look at thatsundayschoolgirl.com, you know that all of the lessons for the month of January are already posted. So I hope that you have it bookmarked to your favorites and you can go out now and download any of the printed lessons for the entire month. If you've looked at the full month lessons, even by the titles, you see that we are shifting to basically marriage month in Sunday school. And so we'll be talking a lot about relationships and marriage. And no singles, that does not mean that we can stay home. There is going to be something for everyone. Now, because I am single, never married, I wanted to be very careful about how I approached sharing the lesson and being mindful not to venture into areas of thought or conversation where I don't have experience. And so to that end, for the month of January, on the second half of all videos, I will have a married couple who will join to give their perspective on the lesson as a married couple. So I pray that you'll be blessed by them. But as I said, I think there is something for everyone. So whether you are single, never married, single again, single by choice, or married, there's going to be something in this discussion for you. So I'm going to do my best to contain my thoughts and review to sort of my learnings as a single and leave the married discussion for the married folks. But that said, I am so blessed to be the product of a couple who were married until death do us part, and that was almost 42 years. And so I grew up seeing a very strong and grounded Christian marriage model. That did not mean that they were perfect people, but they were perfect for each other in that they allowed God to be the center of all that they did. And as they worked through life together and the successes of life and the challenges of life, they did that together. Again, it wasn't always perfect, but together they were committed to God and committed to our family. And that really drove the way that they approached everything about how things were handled in our home. And so that sort of anchors my thoughts about maybe relationships and even kind of shape some of my ideas as a single female, having had my father there who was he was a quiet man, but that was not to be mistaken for a soft personality. And so that's where probably a lot of my thoughts and opinions come from. And so again, I'll try to contain that to the perspectives and my learning as a single. Let's talk about the lesson for this week. I love the lesson title. It is a bride worth waiting for. The Bible basis is Genesis chapter 29, verses 15 through 30. The Bible truth: Jacob's love for Rachel was so great that the additional 7 years of labor was not a burden for him. The memory verse is verse 30, and the lesson aim is that we will recall the story of Jacob's love for and commitment to marry Rachel, reflect on marital relationships and the ways unforeseen circumstances can affect those relationships, and commit to finding faith-based resolution to difficulties before abandoning relationships. And again, I think there's perspective everywhere because, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that if you can learn even as a single about being a good friend, you can learn even a lot about how to contribute in different types of relationships. And some of us are just practicing on just being good friends. But from the lessons perspective, it starts in verse 15, but that's that whole middle of the movie thing again. So you want to go back up to verse 1 and let's look at what's happened overall. So you'll find Jacob, who is on his journey, and he comes to the east side where he sees a field and there are flocks and there are people out there, and he goes and engages in conversation with these people, and it turns out they do know people in common, and specifically they know Laban. Laban happens to be Jacob's uncle, and the people say, yeah, we know Laban, and as a matter of fact, that's his daughter Rachel over there, and she tends to some of her father's sheep. And Jacob sees her, and in his head he hears, could you be the most beautiful girl in the world? When in fact she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And so he continues to talk, and he's looking and he's observing. He sees these sheep and he says, looking at the time of day, why aren't you watering the sheep now and let them go out and graze? And they say, well, we know we should do that, but we're waiting on everyone to come in because we need them, because we need everyone's strength to be able to move the rock from the well to even water the sheep. And so he's still talking, and in comes Rachel on the scene with her flock. And all of a sudden, even though Jacob is in conversation, he's aware of this pretty presence. And suddenly the job that it was supposed to take several people to do, Jacob single-handedly does by moving the stone, and he takes Rachel's sheep and waters them for her. Now that was a romantic overture if I've ever seen one. But it also makes me think from the single girl's perspective about like my dad, who always could see things that needed to be done. He was the kind who would look at your tires for you on your car. He always wanted to check oil before you went out. He could look at the sky and see if things looked threatening, and he would say, be careful. So he watched out. So that's just my little single girl nugget there. So Laban meets Jacob and he says, yep, we're relatives. And Jacob stays around for a while, and that gets us closer to verse 15. And after Jacob's been around for about a month, Laban says, I can't have you just working here and not pay you something. I mean, I know you're a relative, but I can't do that to you. What's your wage? I'm sure your classes may have some discussion about working for relatives. That can be a very interesting thing if you have ever worked for relatives. Just one of those class nuggets. And so Jacob's price is, I'll work for 7 years, but I want that Rachel. And so Laban agrees to that. Now, this sort of reminded me of that whole color purple thing, you know, where Mr. comes and he wants Nettie instead of Celie. So he was asking for Laban's second daughter. Laban's oldest daughter was Leah. Leah, the Bible says, her eyes did something very interesting. In fact, the way the scripture says it, let me see if I can say it appropriately. She was tender-eyed. In other words, you know, sometimes we'll say, oh, she's really nice, or, oh, she's precious. But she wasn't cute. Rachel, on the other hand, was fine. That was everything that she was everything that Jacob thought that a woman should be. And so, as we say in 2016, she was fine. She was snatched. She was all of that. And so that was the one, she was the one that he had his eye on. And so he works for 7 years for his uncle. And then he says, I'm ready for my wife. I've worked my 7 years and I'm now ready for my wife. Now, I find the language in that interesting because even after 7 years, his intensity in pursuing her and desiring her had not diminished. And from that perspective, I also saw just something really special about looking forward to being with a spouse, and how special that still was, that even as a man, he looked forward to being with Rachel. And so he marries. He takes what he believes is Rachel into the marriage, the bedchamber, and the next morning he wakes to find that it was actually Leah that he had been with the night before. Now, how he didn't know he had the right one, I'm not positive. My imagination has to get a little too creative for that. But bottom line is he didn't know, and he felt very deceived by his uncle Laban, who basically says, it wouldn't have been right for me to give you my youngest daughter when the oldest one isn't married. And so he asked, what is it going to take for him to have Rachel? Because that was truly who he wanted. He was given Rachel after staying for 7 days, but was committed to another 7 years for her to have her as his wife. But that was not too much to ask. Here were my lessons from sort of a single point of view. We are worth waiting for. Brides are worth waiting for. And you don't have to be pressured into anything extra. When a young man truly takes interest in you, he will do what is necessary to pursue you. He will do what is necessary to prove himself to you. If you even look at all the things that Jacob did, he went through sort of a proving season that really did nothing but reinforce his commitment to wanting to love Rachel in that way. A man should want to be with you. It should be his desire to be with you, and it should not be a secret. It was not a secret to anyone that Jacob desired Rachel, specifically her family. It was not a secret to her family, her father. He was a man. He went to her father. My father is gone, but there are a lot of protective men in my world. So my brother is incredibly protective. My grandfather is protective and respected in my family. So if there is someone to be brought in, they meet my grandfather. They meet my brother. I have a godfather who does not play games. I have 2 god brothers. The list goes on. But it's important that there are people who are vested in you, who will look and make sure that that's done the right way, that it's the right way. The second thing I saw in this was basically an FBI background check. What do I mean when I say that? Your reputation in some way precedes you. And it's important to know what someone's reputation is. Now, Jacob's reputation, first of all, I already mentioned that he came in and he was a problem spotter. He could see when things weren't quite right, but he also wasn't afraid to get in and work. And they also saw strength in him, even physical strength, that he could move that stone. And then there was an initiative about him that would take those sheep and water them for Rachel. So nothing wrong with that. And even though Jacob was a working man and he was a strong man, ladies, Rachel was tending to her father's sheep. She was working too. And so when Jacob observed her for the first time, he saw not only pretty, but he saw productive. And you never know when you're being observed, and there may be a man who is deciding if you may make a good wife, and he wants to see what that looks like, and he looks at how you process and how you work, how your attitude is, how do you handle things, how do you speak to other people. Those little things, they matter, even in how you carry yourself, in how you dress. Those details may seem small, but you never know when you're being observed. One of my favorite stories was the late Pastor Floyd and supervisor Roberta Thusen, and he said that when he saw her, she was beautiful, but what he noticed about her was that she was working. When he saw her the first time, she was in the choir singing. When he saw her again, she was downstairs in the fellowship hall helping to serve. And so he was observing her working even in that time. So you never know when you're being observed. Let him meet your family. I just mentioned the importance of family. Again, shouldn't be a secret when you're in serious relationship and you're talking about marriage. If you're having to hide it, there's probably a problem. So it shouldn't be a secret. You should want to be involved with families. The men should want to be providers, to be protectors, to be leaders, to do the little and the big things that make you smile. And just the same, you do the little and the big things that make him smile too. And also, I noted, leave the hunt to the man. This reminded me of a video that is actually out on YouTube. If you look for the Women's Convention, Women's International Convention from a few years ago, Mother Frances Kelly. I remembered this video and went and I actually wrote down this quote. And she says, "It's okay that you've got big, pretty legs and smooth feet, but you don't want that to be the first thing the brothers see. We want him to respect your mind. What a man can't see, he'll have to want it. If a man wants to go bear hunting, he will wait all night for it, but he won't even wait outdoors for a cat because there are too many of them." So in other words, there shouldn't be anything common about us as brides worth waiting for, but the hunt should be left up to the man, and he will put in effort. He will put in energy if he decides that the hunt is worth it. So allow him to do that. There will be other discussions that I know you'll have about relationships with in-laws. Again, my only perspective is observing those, but I think my mother is a classic, beautiful story of in-law relationship because my father is gone, and yet that relationship is still incredibly positive. And then there's also a little bit in here from the perspective of preferential treatment among siblings. So the differences that Laban made between Rachel and Leah. Sometimes in families we face that, and there can be a little sibling rivalry around that. So again, lots that you may discuss in your classes. I'll leave that to your teachers. Class is going to be fun. It's the first Sunday of the year. You need to get there. I need to get out of your way so that you can meet Pastor Earle and Lady Denise Fisher of the Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. You're going to enjoy their review. Look forward to seeing you in Sunday school. And again, Happy New Year.
Hey, good people, this is Pastor Earle Fisher.
And this is Denise Fisher.
And let us first thank that Sunday school girl, aka Sister Waynell, for thinking of us and giving us an opportunity to offer some prayerful reflections and some perspective on the Sunday school lesson, A Bride Worth Waiting For. And our biblical basis is Genesis chapter 29, verses 15 through 30. And so I want to offer some perspectives from my experiences as a black man and as a loving husband. And then Denise will offer some perspectives as a black woman and a loving wife. And we've been together now. We've been happily married for 6 years. It'll be 7 in June. And we've been together for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 in November. She still puts up with me. Can you believe that? Look at God, right? So yeah, these two. Right. We want to talk about, of course, to put our text in context, is the relationship that is formed between Jacob and Rachel, but it also includes Rachel's sister Leah and their father Laban. So I want to start off by suggesting that not only are brides worth waiting for, but grooms are worth waiting for too, and working towards. I know we don't any longer live in a world like the world of the text where the marriages are arranged. These not exactly like they were back then. But we know that Jacob works for 7 years to try to earn Rachel's love and ends up through some peculiar exchanges with Leah first. And so I'm a little bit concerned about Brother Jacob's irresponsibility. I'm a little bit concerned about several of our brothers' responsibility, whereby we say we're working towards something, or we're wanting something, and we end up being sidetracked. We end up misplacing our focus. And so I'm not sure how in the world Jacob loves Rachel, but doesn't know the difference between Rachel and Leah, and ends up in bed with Leah. They're going to say something to Laban like, what did you do to me? Well, brother, I want you to be a little bit more attentive. Brothers, we have to be a little bit more attentive so that we don't end up being sidetracked. I want you to know the difference between the one you're pursuing and who her sister or sisters may be. Working towards something, we ought not allow ourselves to be so easily caught up in environments and situations and circumstances where we can end up being manipulated. So don't take your focus off of what you're supposed to be working towards. And so I think God will lead us and guide us and direct us in that regard. But also to the parents. I have a son who is 15, he's a teenager, so he's beginning to date now. I think as parents, as I think about Laban's role in all of this, we should not be bartering our children off. I understand that that's the context in which Laban found himself. That's the world in which they live. But oftentimes, even in the 21st century, many parents are training our children to expect certain things out of relationships and marriages and stuff like that. And oftentimes, we don't give them the adequate information or the tools to make the best decisions that they can. Denise and I did not fall into our relationship. Matter of fact, both of us were in failed engagements before we met. And we have to be diligent to talk to our children about some of the highs and lows of our dating lives, some of the mistakes we've made and stuff like that, so that we don't end up just bartering our children off and sending them off or putting them in circumstances and situations where they don't have much say so. And since I wanted to make sure I heard from Rachel in the text and not much is said about how she feels about all of this, so even Leah from that perspective, I'm glad Denise can offer some perspectives from a Black female and loving wife perspective, so she's going to offer some of those now.
To focus on the Bible truth, which is Jacob's love for Rachel, was so great that the additional 7 years of labor was not a burden for him. And just reflecting on our own marriage, my own marriage, a bride worth waiting for, to take that and to kind of break it down. Putting in the work. Any relationship, marriage, to be a bride or a groom that God has called you to be, it takes work. It takes effort. It takes some type of preparation. Like I said, reflecting on my marriage and our journey, it took work, but it wasn't burdensome. So I get what Jacob was talking about, well, what is mentioned in the scripture, what Jacob was, it wasn't a burden for him. Thinking back to us and our courtship, so to speak, it just kind of flowed, and I think anything that's called by God is not going to be so detrimental, so stressful that it doesn't, it just worries you so much that you can't focus on it.
Can I interject? The Bible does say that God's yoke is easy and God's burden is light. And I think that our relationship has been easy and light. Not that it has not been work or has not added stress and all that other stuff, but it's been work that's manageable. God's yoke is easy, God's burden is light.
Yeah. And also, just to mention, he didn't mind the 7 years of additional work. He already worked 7 years and ended up with the wrong person. And so when the father said to him, well, I'm going to need you to work 7 more years, he didn't mind doing it because he wanted the person that he wanted and he felt that God needed him to be with. So in just reflecting on that, anything in life worth having is worth working for. But don't let it get you to the point where, you're so consumed by the work and not the relationship itself. So I see we are approaching our 7 minutes.
We hope some of what we have offered is going to be helpful. Again, we want to thank Sister Waynell for the opportunity.
Thank you, Waynell.
And I want to thank this sister for being so bold and so brilliant.
And I'd like to thank him for just being who he is and my helpmate.
So from the Abyssinian Baptist Church family in Memphis, Tennessee, all the way to wherever you are, we want to thank you, and we'll see you all soon. May God bless you, and may God keep you even as you work towards your godly relationship. Amen.
Happy New Year.
Peace.